Grand Showdown Someren is just around the corner, and today we will be giving you a quick little overview of what you should know about the event going into the weekend. We are your Shadowverse Evolve English Edition ambassadors. My name is DifferentFight, joined together by the lovely Red Zone Rogue.
How's it going, everyone? I'm really excited to talk about this upcoming event. It's going to be really exciting. It is the final Grand Showdown of the season, and I don't know about you guys, but I've been really enjoying all of the previous Grand Showdowns as well, and I think this one's going to be a very, very exciting one. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We have the event happening on March 22nd in Someren in the Netherlands. This will be the European Grand Showdown, which of course we've had the American one first, then the Asian one, and now it's finally Europe's turn as well. But of course, even though it is technically by region, anyone from anywhere can participate and join to, you know, win some of the lovely prizes that are available. Just like previous events, we have the Nelsha for participation. Top 32 gets the, this time, blue hot stamp Blazing Breath. Top 16 gets the lovely Gilnilly's playmat. And then, of course, you do have the Gilnilly's top 8 prize card that this time comes with a blue hot stamp with a copy for each top 8 player, 2 copies for each top 4, and the champion walks away with a full playset. And of course, the top 3 players get an unsponsored invite to Worlds, which is happening on May 2nd in Tokyo, in Japan. And it's already, you know, coming up pretty close. It's less than 2 months away from when we're recording this.
Oh, man.
So it's actually imminent at this point, right? It's like one of the last chances to get your qualification.
Yeah. And that's a pretty sweet prize pool there, especially the invite to Worlds. I'm very much looking forward to it, and I know Worlds is going to be also a very, very cool and exciting event. And as someone who's been able to travel to Japan in the last year or so, I could say it's an amazing time. So definitely something to work towards. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Even just being at Worlds is like its own very, very exciting experience. So I definitely think it's worth aim for. You know, people have been playing through all the BCSs and, you know, the previous Grand Showdowns as well, trying to snag up those qualifications. And, you know, speaking of the BCSs, we do, you know, we've had how many at this point since set 8's release in English?
I think we've had 6, I believe.
Yes. So 6 BCSs at the time of recording. There are technically 1 or 2 more BCSs before the Grand Showdown.
Yes.
You know, before it actually happens, that might still shake up the meta. But looking at the overall grand scheme of things and how things have laid out, we have 6 overall events that have kind of shaped up the meta, and it's definitely changed a lot since the last Grand Showdown, which was in the previous sets format.
Yeah. And we'll start to kind of talk about a little bit of how those events broke down. And to some degree, I think I could say that there's a little bit of expectation here and some fulfillment of that expectation, but not entirely across the board. There are some BCSs that had like top 8s that had 4 different, you know, class representation, which I think is actually very, very cool. And so it's one of those metas where, yes, there are potentially some outlier decks that seem to perform a little bit better, but that's not the entire story here. You do have these other decks and you do have options. So if you're a player who's like, you know, I'm really into Dragon, for example, I think there's still room to be a Dragon player and to find success in the meta. And I think these 100%. 6 events can, you know, prove that.
That's for sure. I think just to give a good overview for people watching that maybe haven't been keeping up week to week on like what's been topping. So going in order of the events that have been happening since the set released, the first one we had was BCS Florida, which kind of was like one of the more widespread ones. So we had 3 Forest, 2 Rune, 2 Dragon, 1 Sword, which were mostly made up of a lot of the new set decks. But then we had the UK one, which had 4 Swords, which were kind of split between 2 different archetypes, 2 Forests, 1 Haven, which was also a big surprise, and 1 Abyss, which was kind of surprising. People expect Abyss to do really well in this format. And then in Sydney, going to Australia, we had 4 Forests, 2 Abysses, 1 Rune, which is like the big 3 that people kind of see in this current format, and 1 Dragon. And then going to Jakarta, we had 5 Forests, 2 Abysses, and 1 Rune. And then the count goes up again in BCS Ontario, which had the most amount of players and had 6 Forests, 1 Rune, and 1 Sword in top 8. And then the most recent event was BCS France, together with Ontario, which had 3 Forests, 2 Sword, 2 Dragon, and 1 Abyss. So, Kel, what are your main takeaways from just those numbers on their own?
Yeah, like I think going into this, Forest, specifically Puppet Forest, is kind of like the outlier deck, right? That's kind of like the deck to both, look at in terms of like, hey, do I want to play this deck, or like, can my deck beat this deck? I think if you're going into this event, that's you really need to think about, even if you are one of these other players. But I think, the fact that we do have, I think, one of every single class represented in all of these top eights is pretty cool, right? There is like the one Haven faithful player who made it into the one Haven top 8 in the UK. Yeah. And then we had, consistently a couple forests here or there, a couple rune and dragons here or there. And then of course, your abyss as you would expect. I would actually expect there to be more abyss. I think that maybe that's my big takeaway is I expected more abyss. And it's just kind of like, feels like it's maybe more on par with the rest of the classes that aren't forest, to be honest.
Exactly. So it's like the interesting thing is that not every single one of these had at least 2 forests, if not more, like 3 or 4.
Oh yeah.
But basically the reason why forest is so good in this format is because of the new archetype that is Puppet Forest. And so it combines really well with the existing cards because, the Puppet deck generates these 1-cost tokens basically that, or sometimes even 0 cost, depending on what you generate, that essentially add to your combo count. And so because you're playing all these, puppets every turn, they're adding to the combo count every turn. So you can use things like Elf Song, you can use things like Anastasia in order to buff your board overall. And then you have this amazing win con thanks to Orcus, which basically has 2 different forms that she evolves into, depending on if you have, enough puppetry cards in your cemetery. So the first one that she evolves into basically just like summons some puppets for you, and then also gives you a Lloyd token, which is one of the 0-cost tokens that essentially has like ward and, heals you and whatnot. And then the Vengeful Puppet, which is the one that you can evolve into for a higher cost of the Orcus. She summons 4 puppets, gives them all a sail, and every time a puppet leaves the field, you can deal 2 damage to an enemy follower or enemy leader.
Yeah.
And so that means that you basically, once you chip your opponent down to 8, if your board is wide empty and you have something to like, actually swing into, you basically have 8 damage confirmed. And so a lot of the gameplay in this format comes down to how you play around that, and then how Forest manages to find lethal on turns when the opponent is playing around that. So when they're not giving you that easy way to just like swing in 4 times to deal 8 damage, how are you using things like Anastasia and also lethal, other older cards. I do say Puppet is a new deck, but technically there are some Puppet cards from past sets like set 5. Then you have stuff like Noah, which essentially, gives +1 attack and storm to the puppets. So it's like, okay, if you don't put down anything on your board, if you don't put down any wards for me to swing into on the Orcus turn, then I go into Noah and I can swing, a bunch of phase damage instead. And because Noah buffs all of your puppets with +1 attack and storm, that means that the special puppets that Orcus gives you, such as the Lloyd as well as the Victoria, will also get that buff too.
Victoria is crazy.
You have a lot of explosive damage.
Yeah, especially if you like what the puppet deck does is some cards like summon the puppets directly, and some cards put the puppets in your EX area, and you can do Orcus and she just fills your board with puppets. And if you already have a bunch in your EX area, especially if they're the 0-drop ones like Lloyd or Victoria, you can just do like a ton of damage just all at once, especially if the puppets are free, like Lloyd and Victoria. I've seen turns where there's like 2 Victorias in the EX, and you can just burst for 10+ damage out of nowhere. It's a pretty scary deck, and I think what makes it extra strong is that it's like pretty resilient. It can like just make puppets just kind of out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like this mid-range threat that also has like this huge burst combo potential, and I think that's what makes the deck like so strong. It's definitely a good one, and definitely one, as we mentioned, that you really have to have a game plan for.
Yeah, it's like it did really well in Japan when this set was around too. And one of the things that it's also like, we talk about how good Orcus is, but you can also sometimes just like see really good early plays, use some of the older cards like Skuna, for example, with like Nature's Guidance and Elf Song and whatnot, and then just like really steamroll your opponent thanks to Anastasia. And that's why people are teching 4 Anastasia and like 4 cards like Noah that are 5 costs in order to beat them. And the only like big weakness of the deck is that it's really tempo reliant. So if you don't open like your optimal turn 1 like a Junk, or like a turn 2 Flower Doll, or like the Liam, then you do fall off in tempo a little bit. And so it is important to actually be putting down things every turn and setting up that EX area for the big burst turns. Because if you don't, the game plan gets delayed, and then that can give a chance to the other decks as well.
Yeah, yep, for sure. Especially some other decks that maybe are a little bit better at controlling the board state and everything. Like we mentioned Rune, but I know there's a lot of English players out there who are huge fans of not just Rune, but Lishena in particular. And that is one deck that we will see here and there. And that is a deck that just, it's all about playing the long game, right? It's all about controlling the board, destroying your opponent's stuff, and then getting out that inevitability with the destructions in white and black, and just kind of like chipping your opponent down every few turns. And this is a meta where that can be a strategy that could eventually get there. We have seen at least, let's see, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to count them all. 3, 4, 5. At least 5 Rune decks in the top 8 across the 6 events that we saw. And I know, like I said, I know there's a lot of fans out there who are going to definitely be trying for it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is also that, like, it might seem like, oh, why is Lishana suddenly so relevant? And it's like, well, all of the Omen cards or Omen decks got support this set.
Oh yeah,
and I'd say Lishana got some of the best ones because she got a 0-cost spell, which, like, in the history of like digital Shadowverse, anything that costs 0 is usually pretty insane. So it's like having a 0-cost spell that recovers play points and like lets you cycle for cards is already a really good addition. You got the Zealot of Destruction in the set too, that basically just like gives you not just ways to like take care of your opponent's board, but also deal damage and heal, which like is what Lishana wants to do by default anyway. So that's already really good. But the most generic tool in Rune right now, next to like Merlin basically, is the Sweet Tooth Medusa.
Oh yeah,
which basically just does so much in one card. Like, you get removal, you get deck search, you get so many things out of her, and she's only going to be even better in the future going into like future sets for Rune as well. So this card is just such a big buff to any Rune deck, but Lishana in particular, because of the way it works and how it wants to stall out the game and just take care of your opponent's stuff. And, she has strong targets that she can search out, which are like 2 costs or less, such as like both of her spells. It's really, really good. So I think that Rune I definitely could see it popping up throughout the Grand Showdown. So I'm really curious to see like how many players actually bring it as well.
Yeah, what I really like about Rune the most is like this current Destruction Rune list has a lot of redundancy and a lot of consistency with all of the search effects. There's so many, and then there's not just search effects, but there are effects that let you get stuff back from your discard pile, and it's just like for me personally, as a Shadowverse Evolved player, I really enjoy playing it, even if it's one that I don't personally win with a lot. I find it a very enjoyable deck because you can tech in like these toolbox options because you have so many search cards. So you'll see a lot of decks that run like one-ofs certain cards just because you can go search for them with your various cards, but whether it's Merlin or Medusa. I know some decks like my one that I play, I run Agnes Tachyon for not the search. She doesn't have search, but she has ways to get stuff back from your discard pile, which I think is just really, really strong.
Yeah. There's one more Rune deck that did really well in Japan that I wonder if anybody's going to be bringing to the Grand Showdown, which is like the Chimera version of this deck.
Okay.
Which basically just like, it essentially self-decks you out. And then you set up the win con with Chimera thanks to some of the spells that exist. So that deck did really well in Japan, but I feel like people have been more gravitating towards like the regular like Lishana lists. So I'm curious to see if it'll come up. It's a very high execution deck and very stressful to play. Right after Worlds last year, I played in one of the GS events in Japan, which were a team-based event. And then one of my teammates actually played that deck, but every single game he basically went to time, and it would always just be like one tiny mistake would always cost the game. And so I feel like it's a very stressful deck to play, especially for these events with like a lot of rounds and where you have like a Worlds qualification on the line too.
Right.
So I feel like while the ceiling is insanely high for that deck, I do feel like the floor is a little bit dangerously low. So maybe people will not gravitate towards it as much. Maybe that's why we haven't seen as much in English compared to Japan as well.
That seems cool. I actually I didn't know about that list. I actually like the Well, it'd probably be too stressful for me, to be honest. But I love like the what's the right word? Like the pageantry, the spectacle of a deck like that. You know, it's exciting to watch and see decks like that kind of pop off. I hear Chimera and I'm like, ooh, interesting. That sounds cool.
Players preparing for the event should definitely keep in mind. So luckily, I think this meta did not have any streams in Japan. So the event that this meta was played out in wasn't actually live streamed itself. So there's no like streamed gameplay to look back at. But I do think, you know, there's a lot of content creators, you know, both in English and Japanese scenes that have definitely looked at these decks. So it's definitely worth to give it a look as well. So but I think Ruin is definitely one of the big players. But I think the third one that we haven't talked about yet is Abyss. Abyss got like a complete revamp in the set, very different direction from Machina, this time with what was called basically like 2-cost Abyss in Japan. So there's basically, it is literally as like what's written on the label. You just put in a bunch of 2-drops and then you use the Ultra Plane Arbiter to essentially like declare the number 2, mill the top 5 or burn the top 5 cards of your deck, and then do a bunch of AoE damage. And then when you evolve the Arbiter, it gets back like 3 of your 2-drops into your hand.
Yeah.
And
pretty good.
The reason why you do that is because you play with Crimson Rose Queen, who essentially is like you evolve her for a total of, you know, all added up together, it's 8 cost. So it's a pretty late game card. But you reveal your hand when you evolve her, and you recover play points equal to how many 2-drops you have in hand.
Yep.
And so because of that, you can fill up your hand with Arbiter, and then after that you reveal your hand with Crimson Rose Queen, and you get back like, you know, 6 play points or something. And then every time you play a 2-cost, which if you get back 6 play points, you can do 3 times that turn, you can proc one of 2 effects. One of them will burn 2 to all of your opponent's followers, so it's like an AoE 2 damage. And then the second, and also heal your leader too. And the second effect deals 2 damage to the enemy leader. So you basically get to choose between board control and sustain, and just going for lethal. And so a lot of the other 2-drop cards also contribute towards that. And that's what makes this deck like really, really good, because the entire early game, you're just like using the 2-drops. It's slash like some of like, you know, the package that you have from Rulenai. And then after that, you just go into the Arbiter, you fill up your hand, maybe go into Arbiter again if you're going second. But then once you've built up enough hand, you go into the Rose Queen, and then you evolve her, show your opponent your hand, and then they basically can, you know, together with the Thorn Burst that you're getting from Rose Queen, they can basically see if lethal is already spelled out for them or not. Yeah,
I really like this deck. It's people who watch my content know that Abyss is my favorite class in the game. This is not my favorite Abyss deck. We'll maybe talk about that a little bit later, but I really do like this deck. And it's one of those decks where it's really good early game because you just have a ton of 2-drops, right? You have a ton of like really, really efficient 2-drops. Vuela is just really, really good and really, really efficient. You have like your surefire bullets, just like it's just really solid early. And then when you hit that late game, when you're able to do Rose Queen or Arbiter into Rose Queen, you can just kind of like, you know, usually seal the game. And I think that's what makes the deck so good. Like it's good early, it's good late. It doesn't really whiff all that much because like you're running like 30 2-drops. I think my list runs almost exactly 30, maybe 29 if I remember right. But it's literally just all 2-drops, and you're running Arbiter, Rose Queen, and then Rulenai stuff. And that's basically it. Everything else is like a 2-drop. And so the deck is really consistent. And it's really like flexible and just really strong. I think that's what lends the deck to be so powerful. So that is definitely another one that you need to kind of like keep an eye on. It is the Abyss deck where I went and got myself a foil Thorn Burst because I need my one Thorn Burst for my Rose Queen, which is always cool.
Yeah, you gotta have it. Yeah, I think it's definitely a deck that I expect to do well. It surprisingly didn't get as many tops in the BCSs, but when I remember the lineup that we had in our team during this metas event as well, we actually had Puppet Forest and then the Destruction Rune, and our third pick was actually not Abyss. It actually was the deck that I was on, which I think shouldn't be a surprise to many, but it was actually Galmu. So Disdain Dragon got really good support this set, and especially it's very well positioned right now because of like you get that AoE from Total Domination that essentially just helps to answer early puppet boards really, really well. So especially because Galmu's game plan has been kind of sped up in this set, it got really, really nice. So the biggest card of support is Sneer of Disdain, which basically is just a 1-drop spell that deals a damage to one of any follower. But more importantly, when you play Galmu and you have this in Cemetery, you can banish it to deal 1 damage to one of your to any follower on the field, on your field.
Yeah.
And the, of course, strong thing about that is that when you play Galmu, you banish this and deal 1 damage to the Galmu. Now she can evolve for free on turn 5, which she couldn't have done before unless you kept up like a Disciple or something from turn 4 previously, right? And so that just like auto enables it. So if you can ditch it for like Apostle, or if you just like use it as a 1-cost spell to like deal 1 damage to something early, it's really, really good. And then the other really strong support card is the Zealot of Disdain, which basically is like a 2-drop 2/2 that she deals 1 damage to every follower in the field when she comes into play, both yours and your opponent's. And whenever she takes ability damage, she deals 1 damage to each enemy leader. So it's like sometimes Galmi had this problem where you'd be missing like 1 or 2 damage from lethal. You know, you'd be like counting lethal in like either amounts of Forte you can play or like bursts of 3 that you can do from Galmu. And you'd be like, oh man, I'm just like 1 or 2 off. But then thanks to Zealot, that 1 or 2 gets covered, which is really, really good. And then generically, Dragon got a couple cards in the set too that work really, really well with Galmu as well. So Dragon Soul Princess is a 3-drop that looks at top 5, puts a Wormkin into EX, and if you're an Overflow, makes it cost 3 less to play, which is really, really good because basically the entire Apostle deck is Wormkin. So you can basically play Galmu for just 2 cost if you're an Overflow, which is really, really good. But the other Wormkin from the set is Azida Haka, which is a 6-cost 5/6 that basically on Fanfare has this like unique mechanic where it turns 3 phase down evolve cards in your evolve deck face up and then destroys an enemy follower. But if you evolve it, it is actually a Storm 7/8 that, depending on how much you have face up in your evolve deck, either heals you or deals 3 damage to the enemy leader.
Yeah.
And the healing is really good because until now, Galmu didn't have good generic healing. And so this way you have not just generic healing, but also 7 damage face. Doesn't have aura unlike Forte, but it's still a very good additional damage burst option that the deck is very happy to have.
Yeah. It just reminded me too, talking about Disdain and talking about Galmia and getting Galmia. I know myself, and I've seen some other lists too, have started to include like 1 or 2 ofs Tartman, just because Tartman is just a card that lets you go search your deck for any single card, and it's a card that I've actually put into my I put a 1 of, I think, into my 2-drop Abyss, just so I can go search for Rose Queen or Arbiter, because those are such like big parts of the deck. And I've seen some Dragon lists put like a 1 or 2 of Tartman, and just so they can make sure they go get their Galmu. Or, you know, it's good to go search for like Forte or Azida Haka as well if you just need that burst damage. But just wanted to mention the Tartman as like a 1 of or 2 of in some of the decks, which I find pretty cool.
Speaking of like good generic tools, right? I mean, it's just very good in like, if you have that one specific, you know, boss card that your deck needs to function around, it's basically like a 4th copy of it, right?
Yep. I think my own Disdain list, I run one Tartman as like a cheeky little search, just so you can get whatever you need. Like if you need the Galmu, if you need the Forte, if you need whatever else, it's a nice little catch-all. If you need your board wipers or anything like that, it's very nice.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of omens, I mean, Galmu is definitely one of the top contenders in this meta, but I think, you know, we did mention that Sword got quite a few tops, and quite a few of them are just basically Natura lists that basically just put in like Ether of the Warrior Wing into the deck and just kind of called it a day, you know, just to add extra consistency into the deck. But the other deck that got really good support in this Kel is, of course, the Thief Sword, right?
Ooh. Yep. So if Abyss is my favorite, Sword is probably my second favorite. I play a lot of Sword. Okay. Sword's probably the deck that I'm like best at playing as well. And the Thief archetype is my favorite version of it. And I got some really nice new toys to play with. We got all some of the new the Thief cards. And just overall, it's a deck that has become a little more resilient. So we did get some Thief cards. We also got some other cards that aren't specifically Thief cards that let us get like basically, I'm just gonna say dudes from our cemetery back. They let us get 2-drops back. And one of the things that, like in Shadowverse Evolve, one of the deck strategies that I think is just really good is just a single card that can just absolutely flood your board with stuff. And Sword got multiple copies of that type of effect in the set. Actually, let me look it up. I don't remember the names of the cards.
I mean, we have like Sword Flash Panther was one of them, right? So it's like a 4-drop that, you know, chooses a 2 cost or less in your cemetery, summons it and gives it +1 attack. So, you know, that like works really well with something like Ralmia, for example, that you can then just like bring out and evolve as well, as long as you have the, you know, the board to reduce her evolve cost. But specifically, you know, Thief Sword itself got things like the Dance of Usurpation, which is the 4-drop spell that basically deals 4 damage divided between any number of enemy followers. But then if your opponent has 10 or more cards in cemetery, you make that into 8 damage. But if they have 20 cards in cemetery, then you also deal 8 damage to each enemy leader.
Hit him for 8.
You get to 10 pretty easily, right? I mean, your whole deck's point and objective is to do that.
Yep.
But getting to 20 has gotten easier with this set as well. And you also have like Grand Acquisition from set 6 that, like, you know, buries the opponent's top 3 cards of their deck. So getting to that 20 point is actually pretty easy now. So sometimes you do just use the 4 play points on this spell just to burn them 8 damage, because like 8 damage is a lot, right? That is, you know, at some points it is just basically a lethal range that your opponent has to be aware of. And if they don't think about it, then they are going to get got, right? And, you know, speaking of the 2-drops, I guess, that the Sword Flash Panther can revive, there's a new 2-drop for Thief as well, which is the Zealot of Usurpation, which is like a 2-drop that is a 3/2 with Rush. And on Fanfare, it buries the top card of your opponent's deck. And if they have 10 or more cards in their cemetery, you put the top card of your deck into your EX area, which is basically just like draw a card, right? Except that because it goes to EX area, your Octress can make it cost 2 less, which is also a very good synergy.
Yeah. The deck just is one of those kind of like, I don't know, mid-rangey threat decks, but can have like really, really good you know, burst potential too. We still have cards like is it the Disciple of Usurpation, the one that's a 3/2 storm that can get the +2 on attack. That one's quite strong. And then you still have cards like Gem Staff, so you can go like, you know, search your deck for whatever you need. Yeah, the deck is pretty sweet. And I will say I have had a couple matches where I was playing against Lashena, particularly like, you know, grindy matchup, but I ended up milling them out. Like I completely decked them. They couldn't kill me. I couldn't kill them because I had so much removal, but I just ended up, you know, getting rid of their entire deck. So it's not something that'll come up every now and then, but hey, it's happened before, and I think it could happen again. It's an interesting deck. I'll say this. And if you are the kind of player who likes to play your opponent's cards, then this is a great one. You're gonna love Octress.
Yeah, let me yoink that Ozzy the Hawker real quick.
Yeah.
It's like, I guess Ozzy is one of them, you know, in case, although it's kind of like difficult since you'd have to turn your own evolved deck face up. I guess like Forte is still a pretty good one.
Yeah.
But especially in the current meta. I mean, when you think about like, I guess when it comes to trying to steal your opponents, like in the puppet matchup, you could technically take your opponent's like Noah, and then he's gonna give the storm to your side of the field too, so that's also not too bad. And then, you know, trying to steal one of your opponent's like hand discard cards in Abyss, or some of the removal cards in like the Rune matchup. There's definitely quite a few. Like when you think about what's popular in this meta, Thief is also pretty good, because as long as you know what to steal, it is also going to be very, very effective in that matchup as well.
Yeah, and the one card that I forgot the name of, but I just had to go look up. He's a new card, and I forgot his name, but his Azord, Duke of the Mists. It's a pretty interesting card. This is one of the cards that just helps flood your board with stuff. He's 4-drop 3/4 with Ward. He can Evo for 3. But when he evolves, he lets you take 2 sword followers that cost 2 or less in your cemetery, and you just summon them. So he's kind of like double Panther. It's just a single card that you can drop in the mid or late game and just be like, here, now I have a giant board. You just have to be careful. You can't combo him too well with Ralmia, because you have to Evo him to get the effect. So you can't Evo him, get Ralmia, and then Evo her. You have to wait for the next turn to do that, but because you can't Evo twice. But still, it's a really sweet. Like, I think the deck has a lot of resiliency now too. Like, there's a lot of removal going around, so the fact that you have these cards that help you get stuff back from your cemetery is just really strong.
100%. And so we've talked about almost every single class.
Yes.
or the main classes. But the last one remaining, of course, is Haven, which did get one single top in BCS so far. And the deck that got supported and did get the top is Wardhaven in this set. So Wardhaven's been kind of sort of around here and there and always gets like some cards of support here and there, which are like, you know, if it's a Haven card that has Ward written on it, it technically is support for Wardhaven. But the main support card, I guess, this set is the Holy Lord Nectar, which basically is a way to, you know, it's a ward that revives 2 of your Haven followers that cost 2 or less from your cemetery. And it also gives all Haven followers Rush. And if you banish 3 Haven followers from your cemetery, it gives each other follower in your field +1/+1 as well.
Yeah. I think Ektar is really good. This is a deck that I actually have enjoyed playing quite a bit because you do have that Ektar package. So you have Ektar, and then you run like a suite of 2-drops, everything from Demon's Epitaph, which is just kind of a generally good one, to ones with Storm, like Meowskers and the Amethyst Lion.
Yeah.
So you can just kind of get some dudes back, and then they have Storm, and so you can kind of like punch in for damage. So you kind of can pivot from this really defensive deck into an aggressive thing. And I also just think the deck has some of the best value mid-range cards. With Alter Chaotica, we got Angel of the Iron Steed. And this is one of the cards that when I read it, I was like, wait, this is a bronze? This is a 4-drop, 3/4 with Ward. And then on Fanfare, you summon a Mystic Artifact token follower. And what a Mystic Artifact is, it's a 2/3, also with Ward. And on Fanfare, you draw a card. So for 4 play points, you get 5/7 worth of stats between 2 ward bodies, and you draw a card, and that's on turn 4, which is just really good, especially against decks that are trying to be aggressive. So you just put up, it's just all shields up, and it just feels really good to play. It's like, oh, turn 4, this is great, and I think that's one of the most fun parts about the deck. Other than that, you also have stuff that is returning, like you have your Aether of the White Wing, which is just insanely good. You can go search for something like your Wilbert or your Kaede, and then just jam them right into play. You can even get your Ektar if you have, if it's a later turn, if you have like 8 play points, you can go get your Ektar. And like, well, I mentioned this before, but decks that can just absolutely fill the board out of nowhere with like a single card, I think are just very, very strong if they can get to that point. And Aether really helps that. You can go Aether into Ektar and into your other followers from Ektar's ability. So it's just the kind of deck where like, hey, you wipe my board, sure, I'll just drop my 1 card and fill everything up out of nowhere. And so this is a deck where it's not, we did see the one Haven Faithful make it into the top 8, but I would not be surprised if we didn't see at least some amount of Haven representation. I know they're the diehard Haven fans. Every time I make a video, someone always comments on the Haven stuff. And so I would not be surprised. And this is one of the decks where it can just shut down your strategy depending on what you're doing, right? If they just ward up and just have this giant army of ward followers, it can be really, really hard to like punch through, especially if you're like a board-based deck and trying to do board-based damage. I will say that is one of the reasons why stuff like 2-drop Abyss and Puppet can be very strong, is because they can go over the top of the ward because they have effects that deal damage directly to the leader rather than having to punch through. And so if you are a ward player, that's something you have to really, pay attention to, those key cards that can punch damage through your ward stuff.
Just keep in mind you don't leave up too much stuff that gets assailed into by Orcus, and then you get that lethal damage dealt to you as well.
Yep.
So we've gone through all of the kind of like the main meta decks, but Kel, what would you say, like, if you had to choose a deck that you think is going to win the entire event this weekend, what's it going to be?
I was preparing my off meta pick. I was like, oh, I got this one. The one that I expect,
we'll talk about that too.
The one that I expect to win is going to be a really boring answer, right? I have a feeling. Okay, so in the top 8, I think there's going to be a pretty large Puppet representation. I want to say at least 3 or 4 for sure, maybe even more. I think there's a really good chance that Puppet wins. I'm going to give it, like, just in terms of like percentages, maybe like a 75% chance that a Puppet deck takes it. I really want Abyss. I really want Abyss to win. I think Abyss is really good. And so I'm going to say it has a shot, and we haven't really seen Abyss take too many like events as like the overall winning deck. So I'm going to say Abyss, the deck is good. good enough to win. So that's going to be my call, specifically the 2-drop Abyss. How about you? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think for me, like looking at the European BCS specifically, because this is the European Grand Showdown, we've seen a bit less forest and a bit more sword.
Good point.
Do well
Good point.
in Europe. So I'm kind of curious if that's gonna actually affect things. And also Dragon's been pretty well performing too. Abyss, unfortunately, has been, you know, kind of like decent, but always gets like 1 top or something as well. So I realistically, I also expect Forest to win the whole thing. I do think that there's been a month and a bit to prepare for this event. And so because of that, I think the players can really polish their plays as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if Rune makes a big up and coming as well, just because it has a lot of the tools to answer this matchup specifically. And especially, you know, things kind of just like play out right. You do have ways to deal with the puppet board, and you have a lot of sustain and healing that you can just kind of like try to stall them out as well, as long as they don't open the absolute nuts in their early tempo as well. But realistically, I do think everything is very favored for Forest. And I do think it's going to be interesting to see, you know, how much, for example, some of the players are going to be teching some of the cards that you could tech in this specific format in order to help to answer this matchup in particular. So you do have ways to get rid of things like the, you know, the Anastasia or the Noah, thanks to the inclusion of one of the more generic cards in this set, which is Sylvia the Condenser. So she like lets you pay 2 and discard herself to just destroy an opponent's 5 cost or more follower. So that's really good because not only does it take out, you know, Anastasia as well as the Noah, but for example, in the Abyss matchup, sometimes they just like leave the Rose Queen up and just wait. And so you can take her out as well because it takes out 5 cost or more. And so because of that, you have like ways to target the Arbiter, ways to target the Rose Queen. And so the only thing is that you don't get to target anything in Rune, so it doesn't really do too much in that matchup. But I expect techs like that to be run quite a bit in this format. And so I'm curious to see if any decks using techs like that will be able to make use of that Forest matchup. But otherwise, I'm also locking in Forest for the win slot. But any surprising decks that you think might make it into the cup?
Okay, so let's talk about Sylvia a little bit more, because I really like Sylvia and I think she's really good in my personal favorite deck. And this is kind of like my pet deck. It's the deck that I've been you know, tweaking every here and there since, I don't know, like set 2 or 3 or something. And that is Control Abyss. My version has shifted a little bit more towards your Reanimator package with Death's Breath and Israfil. And I have incorporated Sylvia now into the list as well, because I think she just fits in absolutely perfectly, because she's a card where you can discard her early on, get her effect, destroy something like the Anastasia, like Chris mentioned, and then later on you can resurrect her with Death's Breath and get that fanfare effect, deal damage directly to your opponent, and then she also has now ward because of the Death's Breath. The deck also packs a lot of hand disruption. I do run the full full Rulanite package. I was like, what's his? He's the discard guy. What's his name? I do run the full like Rulanite package as well, and the deck just has a bunch of just incidental discard. So it's like a lot. It's hand disruption. It's like board disruption. It has resiliency, and it has ways to close out the game and ways to gain life, because you have your Israfils who gain life as well. So I really like the deck. And I'm also running stuff like Kawi, who's also really good at just killing stuff and gaining life. I still run my my Ginsetsus. So I know there's other big like Control Abyss fans out there. I really like the deck. That is my personal rogue pick. Do I think it's going to win or get top 8? Probably not. But if it did, I would be really, really hyped. And I wouldn't be too surprised. I think it's very good. And I think it's just really fun to play. So that's mine. That's kind of my off meta, my rogue pick. Do you have any that you're kind of like, you know, thinking about or cooking?
I think for me, the deck I want to see, at least on stream once or twice, is definitely just Galmu. It's definitely my favorite deck, and I think it was really, really good in this format too. I do think Aggro Dragon got a little bit of cool support in the set too. The Otohime, the other legendary in this set, is, you know, definitely quite good in just being able to do a bunch of like burn damage, and then also like, you know, have these like tokens that have rush that like take care of your opponent's board as well. And it's just kind of like a very interesting addition to Aggro Dragon, which has been kind of like getting stuff across like several sets over time. So I do think Aggro Dragon is like an interesting little deck that like could technically make use of the fact that a lot of the decks in this format are quite setup reliant. And then if you can just like bash them fast enough, you do have a bit of a chance. But personally speaking, the deck that I'm kind of like really hoping gets at least one top 8 spot is Galmu. This is her chance, and I really hope that she makes use of it in order to get that top cut slot, maybe even a world invite. We'll see. We'll see how much the European players do like Dragon. It's been topping quite a bit in the European BCSs, so it's not an unrealistic expectation. So I'm curious to see how it's going to wrap up. But for people going to the event itself, I mean, don't forget that, of course, our side events at the event too. You have things like cross draft happening and, you know, the free fights, and you're able to get some lovely evolution points as well as promo cards from there as well. So make sure you give it a chance. And if you're in Europe, you know, head on over to the venue, which is in Someren, and that will be happening once again on the 22nd of March for the European region. But before we wrap up for this video, Kel, any other final thoughts before the big weekend?
I'm just really looking forward to it. And I do want to say, like Chris mentioned, like the side events and all that kind of stuff. If you are in the area and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can compete at the main event, it's cool to just show up and play in the side events. As Chris mentioned, there's Crosscraft, and personally speaking, I think those Mono Evo points look awesome. Like I would personally really like to get a set of them. They're super cute. And so like my thing is like, hey, it's an open invite event. You don't have to qualify to go to this event. You can just show up and just have some fun, play some games. You can compete in the main event. You can do some side events. You can even do both. You can do the main event. Maybe if you scrub out, then do some side events. And so I think it's just a great day of Shadowverse Evolve. And I would just recommend just going and checking it out. Yeah.
100%. 100%. And of course, if you can go and check it out, there will be a stream for the event as well. So we've kind of already mentioned it here and there, but make sure you tune in. It's going to be streamed on the usual channel as always. So make sure you subscribe to the Shadowverse Evolve English Edition official channel. And of course, all of the other social media that Shadowverse Evolve English Edition has. And we'll see you on the stream, even if you can't make it to the event to watch all of the very exciting games. We will be your 2 commentators for the event as well. So it's going to be exciting to see how the EU players will perform. So I'm definitely really looking forward to it. But I think that's about it for our sort of expectations, preparation tips and whatnot. So the decks to look out for in this very exciting set 8 meta. Every single class has a fighting chance. So I think it's going to be very exciting to see what the players actually do end up bringing. But before we close out, any other final thoughts?
No, I think that's it. I'm just really looking forward to it. It's just right around the corner. Hoping to see a sweet top 8, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, absolutely. Same here as well. Can't wait to see how many puppets make it to the top 8, how many of the decks from the past sets will convert as well, how many decks that were supported in the set and that kind of revived will have a chance into top cut as well. So it's going to be a very exciting meta and going to be really cool to see a lot of the talented European players have a chance to fight for those Worlds qualifications, the very last minute Worlds qualifications as well. But I think with that, that's going to be it from us. We're going to see you on the 22nd of March on the live stream. So make sure you tune in if you're not able to attend the event in person. And even if you are attending in person, you can always watch the stream between rounds too. So that's me for us. I've been DifferentFight together with...
Yep, it's me, Kel, also known as Red Zone Rogue. Thank you all so much for your time and watching, and we'll see you next time.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.